In the true crime history of Victorian England, there are cases that shock you, and then there is the case of Kate Webster. This is one of the most disturbing historical crime stories ever recorded at the Old Bailey, and it is almost completely unknown today. On the 2nd of March, 1879, in the quiet London suburb of Richmond, a housemaid named Kate Webster murdered her employer, dismembered the body with an axe and a meat saw, boiled the flesh off the bones in a laundry copper, and then walked to the local pub and tried to sell the rendered fat as best dripping. This is not a legend. This is not a rumor. Every detail of what you are about to hear was confirmed at trial and entered into the official court record at the Central Criminal Court in London in July of 1879. This is the Kate Webster case, one of the most chilling true crime documentary subjects in British legal history. Julia Martha Thomas was 54 years old, a widow twice over, and she lived alone at 2 Vine Cottages on Park Road in Richmond, Surrey. She was small, well-dressed, and described by her doctor as a lady of careful habits. She was not wealthy by Victorian standards, but she dressed as though she were, always wearing jewelry when she went out, always keeping up appearances in a neighborhood that valued respectability above almost anything else. In January of 1879, through the recommendation of a mutual acquaintance, she hired a new housemaid. The woman's name was Kate Webster. She did not check her references. That was her fatal mistake. Kate Webster was born Catherine Lawler in 1849 in Killan, County Wexford, Ireland. By the time she arrived at Julia Thomas's door in Richmond, she had already served multiple prison sentences for larceny and fraud. She had an illegitimate son she could barely support. She had a talent for reinvention, for presenting herself as someone she was not, and a complete absence of anything resembling conscience. By every account that survives, she was charming when she needed to be, and capable of extraordinary violence when she was cornered. The women's relationship deteriorated almost immediately. Julia criticized Kate's work. Kate spent her evenings in the local pub, the Hole in the Wall, drinking instead of performing her duties. At the end of February, Julia gave her notice. Kate was ordered to leave on the 2nd of March, and that is when this Victorian true crime story crossed into territory that would horrify all of England. On the evening of Sunday the 2nd of March, 1879, Julia Thomas returned home from church. What followed is one of the most brutal acts in British criminal history. Kate Webster attacked her employer at the top of the stairs. In her confession to a priest, given only hours before her execution, Kate described throwing Julia from the top of the staircase to the ground floor. She then strangled her to death. What she did next, however, is what made this case a sensation that the Victorian public could not stop reading about. Kate Webster retrieved an axe, a carving knife, and a meat saw. Over the course of that night, she dismembered the body. She then filled the laundry copper, the large iron cauldron used in Victorian households for boiling clothes, with water, lit the fire beneath it, and cooked her employer's remains. She burned the internal organs. She stuffed the arms, legs, and torso into a wooden box. 1 foot and the head would not fit. She buried the foot in a manure pile in the garden. The head she placed in a black bag and carried with her when she left the house the following morning. What happened next is where this unsolved Victorian mystery becomes something almost incomprehensible. Kate Webster did not flee. She stayed in Julia Thomas's house. She put on Julia's clothes. She wore Julia's rings. She told anyone who asked that she had recently come into an inheritance from a dear aunt and that she was selling the house and furniture. She sold the dead woman's belongings piece by piece, and on the day after the murder, she walked into the Hole in the Wall pub, the same pub where she had spent Julia Thomas's final weeks drinking, and she offered the landlady jars of what she described as best dripping, the Victorian equivalent of cooking fat. It was not animal fat. Court testimony later confirmed that 2 boys in the neighborhood had also been given what Kate described as pig lard by a generous neighbor. They said it was delicious. This is the detail that the Victorian press could not let go of, and it is the detail that makes this historical murder mystery one of the most disturbing true crime cases ever documented in Britain. The wooden box containing Julia Thomas's remains was dumped into the Thames from Richmond Bridge with the help of a young man named Robert Porter, who Kate had told simply that a friend would be collecting it. Porter had no idea what was inside. The following morning, the box floated to the surface. Fishermen opened it and found what was left of Julia Martha Thomas, cooked, dismembered, and unidentifiable. London newspapers named it the Barnes mystery. The police were baffled. They had human remains, but no head, no name, no suspect. The Victorian murder investigation that followed was one of the most complex the Metropolitan Police had yet conducted. Kate Webster, meanwhile, had fled back to Ireland, still wearing Julia Thomas's clothes and rings. She was tracked to her hometown of Callan in County Wexford and arrested on the 29th of March, 1879. She was brought back to Richmond, charged with murder, and transferred to Newgate Prison. Her trial opened at the Old Bailey on the 2nd of July, 1879. It was one of the most sensational trials in Victorian legal history. The courtroom was packed every single day. The Crown Prince of Sweden attended. Wax figures of Kate Webster appeared in exhibitions across London. Ballads were written about the case and sold on street corners. Victorian England had never quite seen anything like it. A female killer who had not just murdered but had attempted to erase every trace of her victim, who had lived in the dead woman's house, worn her clothes, and tried to sell her body as food. Kate Webster pleaded not guilty. She blamed the murder on a man named John Church, a complete lie, and one that collapsed immediately when Church produced an airtight alibi. During the trial, shocking testimony emerged that Webster had boasted about an expected inheritance 5 days before the murder, evidence of premeditation that destroyed any argument this was a crime of sudden passion. She was convicted on the 9th of July, 1879. She then attempted a move that Christiana Edmonds, the chocolate cream killer we covered in an earlier episode, had also tried. She claimed to be pregnant in order to delay her execution. A medical examination proved the claim false. She was hanged at Wandsworth Prison on the 29th of July, 1879. She was 30 years old. In her final confession, she told a priest that the argument with Julia Thomas had ripened into a quarrel, and that in the height of her anger and rage, she threw her from the top of the stairs. The confession said nothing about what came after. Perhaps some things are beyond words, even in confession. The skull of Julia Martha Thomas was never found during her lifetime and was never officially recovered during the original investigation. Then, in 2010, builders excavating the garden of a property in Richmond unearthed a human skull. The property had once been a stable adjacent to the original murder house. Carbon dating placed the skull firmly within the Victorian period. The skull had fracture marks consistent with being thrown down a staircase and, crucially, abnormally low collagen levels, consistent with having been boiled. In 2011, the coroner officially confirmed it was the skull of Julia Martha Thomas. The missing head had been buried less than 100 meters from where the murder took place for 131 years. And in February 2026, in a final twist that brought this dark Victorian history back into the news, builders renovating the home of the broadcaster Sir David Attenborough, which stands on the same Richmond plot, unearthed a further fragment of remains. The case that Kate Webster thought she had buried forever keeps coming back to the surface. Julia Thomas deserved better than what was done to her. She deserved a name, a proper burial, and justice served in her lifetime. She got none of those things quickly. But 146 years later, the historical record is clear. Kate Webster murdered her employer in one of the most cold-blooded acts in Victorian criminal history, and the true crime documentary record of what she did, preserved in court transcripts, newspaper archives, and the Old Bailey proceedings, will not let the story be forgotten. This has been Dark Verdict. Every case is real. Every detail is sourced. Every verdict is final. Subscribe for a new case every week, and if you have a case you think we should cover, leave it in the comments below.